Hey, welcome back to the YouTube channel for the Renaissance English History Podcast. I am your host, Heather. I've been podcasting on Tudor England since 2009 with my show, making it the original Tudor History Podcast. This channel is where I put all of my episodes from all of my shows, as well as tons of extra content like this video right here. Today, we are going to talk about the relationship between Eustace Chapuys and Henry VIII. So Eustace Chapuys was the ambassador from the Holy Roman Empire, the Spanish ambassador, and he wrote such detailed letters. We know so much about him. He was such a supporter of Catherine of Aragon, and he's a fascinating person just because we do know a lot about him from his writing. He witnessed a lot of these really important events. And so we're going to talk a little bit about his relationship with Henry. I've done some other videos on like his relationship with Anne and his relationship with Mary, Anne Boleyn and Mary. Princess Mary. So we're going to talk now about him and Henry. Before we get into that, though, if you would like to see more Tudor history in your YouTube feed, and who doesn't, go ahead and hit subscribe so you never miss a video that I put out. All right, so the year is 1533, and the Tudor court is buzzing with whispers of upheaval. Henry VIII, the larger-than-life King of England, is celebrating his controversial marriage to Anne Boleyn, while Europe watches in shock. In the midst of this storm stands a quiet, observant figure, and that would be Eustace Chapuys, the ambassador of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor. Chapuys' role is far from glamorous. His job is to protect the interests of Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, and Charles V's aunt. Chapuys is a man of contradictions. He's scholarly, yet very sharp-tongued. He's diplomatic, yet fiercely loyal. His dispatches back to Charles V are filled with keen observations and biting commentary, making him both an invaluable source of information for historians and also a thorn in Henry's side. But despite their differences, the relationship between Henry and Chapuys would prove to be one of mutual need, begrudging respect, and occasional sparks of genuine camaraderie. Born in Savoy in 1490, Chapuys was a man of learning and diplomacy. He studied canon and civil law, skills that made him an ideal candidate for the Holy Roman Emperor's service. In 1529, he was appointed as Charles V's ambassador to England, a post that would test his intellect and resolve like never before. From the moment he arrived in Henry's court, Chapuys' mission was clear: to defend Catherine of Aragon's rights as queen and oppose Henry's efforts to annul their marriage. This was not an easy task. Henry was determined to sever ties with Rome and marry Anne Boleyn, and anyone who stood in his way risked being swept aside. Chapuys quickly established himself as a shrewd observer of court politics. His letters to Charles V are filled with vivid descriptions of the personalities that he encountered: Henry's charm and his temper, Anne Boleyn's wit and her ambition, and factional rivalries that defined the Tudor court. But Chapuys' role was more than just that of a chronicler. He was also a key player in the delicate chess game of Tudor diplomacy. From the outset, Chapuys viewed Henry with a mixture of fascination and disdain. He admired the king's intelligence and political acumen, but he was appalled by his treatment of Catherine of Aragon and his break with the Catholic Church. Chapuys' dispatches often described Henry as charming but erratic, a man whose ego and passions frequently overrode his better judgment. One of Chapuys' most pointed critiques came during the height of Henry's relationship with Anne. Chapuys would refer to Anne as the concubine, refusing to acknowledge her as queen, and he made no secret of his belief that Henry's obsession was leading him to ruin. Despite his personal feelings, though, Chapuys was careful to maintain a diplomatic facade in his dealings with Henry. He knew that open hostility would jeopardize his mission and risk alienating Charles V from the English court. While Chapuys often painted Henry in less than flattering light, Henry's opinion of Chapuys was more complex. On one hand, Chapuys was a constant reminder of Charles V's disapproval, Catherine of Aragon's enduring resistance, and the broader Catholic opposition to Henry's reforms. On the other hand, Henry was a pragmatist. He understood that Chapuys was an essential link to Charles and a way to gauge the emperor's moods and political stance. Henry, in typical fashion, alternated between irritation and begrudging respect for Chapuys. He was often frustrated at the ambassador's refusal to acknowledge Anne Boleyn as queen, yet he sought Chapuys' approval on matters that required delicate diplomacy. For example, Henry frequently tried to convince Chapuys of the righteousness of his actions, as if winning over the ambassador might somehow justify his break with Catherine or the schism with Rome. Despite their opposing loyalties, there were moments when the relationship was surprisingly cordial. Chapuys was known to flatter Henry when it suited his purpose, and Henry also occasionally extended kindness to the ambassador. This uneasy mix of manipulation and respect would define their interactions. One of the most memorable moments in the relationship between Henry VIII and Eustace Chapuys came in April 1536, right before Anne Boleyn's dramatic fall from power. For 3 years, Chapuys had avoided coming face to face with Anne and having to acknowledge her as queen. But then came a moment of confrontation on Tuesday, April 18, 1536, at Greenwich Palace. Chapuys arrived at court expecting to meet with Henry VIII to discuss the emperor's proposals for an alliance. Instead, he found himself at the center of a carefully orchestrated maneuver designed to force him to acknowledge Anne as queen. When he arrived, he was greeted not by Henry, but by Thomas Cromwell and George Boleyn. They relayed a message from the king suggesting that Chapuys should visit Anne and kiss her hand. While framed as a polite invitation, it was clear that this was not a simple courtesy. Chapuys immediately refused, citing diplomatic prudence. He explained that he should first discuss the emperor's proposals with Henry, as acknowledging Anne might spoil matters. Cromwell, always adept at reading the political landscape, agreed to relay this message to the king, reassuring Chapuys that Henry had taken the refusal in an okay way. Henry then made a show of welcoming Chapuys warmly, engaging him in polite conversation about the emperor's health and recent travels. Yet when Chapuys attempted to broach the subject of their alliance, Henry deftly sidestepped, saying, "Well, we shall have leisure to discuss that in all matters." With that, he left for Mass, setting the stage for the pivotal moment that followed. Chapuys was escorted to Mass by George Boleyn, who no doubt anticipated what was to come. The ambassador knew he might soon be forced into direct contact with Anne. As Mass began, he positioned himself strategically behind a lower door, likely hoping to avoid Anne's notice. The king and queen, seated above in their royal pews, descended to the altar for the offertory, a customary moment for public reverence. The chapel was crowded with onlookers, many of whom eagerly awaited the ambassador's reaction. Chapuys later reported that the great concourse of people had gathered to see how the concubine and I behaved to each other. As Anne entered the main body of the chapel, she spotted Chapuys. There was no escape. With Henry watching closely, Chapuys had no choice but to bow to her. Anne, for her part, displayed remarkable composure. She returned his gesture with equal courtesy, ensuring there was no public display of triumph or gloating. Chapuys later wrote that she turned back merely to do me reverence like that which I made to her. Despite Anne's grace, Chapuys' feelings remained unchanged. He handed her 2 candles to use during the altar ceremonies, an act he later dismissed as obligatory politeness. Reflecting on the event days later, he remarked bitterly, "If I had seen any hope of the king's answer, I would have offered not 2, but 200 candles to the she-devil." Anne was eager to capitalize on this victory, and she anticipated that Chapuys would join the king and other dignitaries for the dinner in her apartment. But when Henry arrived, Chapuys deliberately stayed behind, choosing instead to dine in the king's presence chamber with George Boleyn and some other nobles. Anne was visibly confused, and she asked Henry why the ambassador hadn't joined them. Henry replied it's not without good reason, fully aware of the uproar that Chapuys' reluctant acknowledgement would cause. But later, in a private meeting with Chapuys, Henry's mood turned sour. He rejected the emperor's proposal, refused to reconcile with Rome, and demanded a letter of apology from Charles V. The meeting ended in frustration, with Henry berating Chapuys and Cromwell for their respective roles in the negotiations. For Cromwell, the day was pivotal. He realized that Anne, far from securing her position, had become a liability. And from that moment on, Cromwell began plotting her downfall in earnest. The death of Catherine of Aragon earlier than that, in January 1536, was a turning point in Chapuys' role at court. He'd been deeply loyal to Catherine and was devastated by her passing. His letter to Charles V described her final days with poignant detail, portraying her as a devout and dignified woman who died unjustly abandoned. Catherine's death also altered the dynamics at court. With her gone, Henry moved swiftly toward a new chapter, Anne Boleyn's fall and his marriage to Jane Seymour. Chapuys, though grieving, adapted to these changes, finding new ways to influence court politics and represent Charles's interests. By the 1540s, Chapuys' health began to decline, and in 1545, after nearly 2 decades at the Tudor court, he retired from his post and returned to his homeland. His departure marked the end of an era in Anglo-Imperial relations, as Chapuys had become almost as much of a fixture in Henry's court as the king himself. His letters are one of the most vivid and detailed accounts of Henry VIII's reign, offering historians unparalleled insights into the court's inner workings. More than a diplomat, he was a storyteller, capturing the drama, intrigue, and humanity of one of history's most infamous monarchs. So there you go, a little bit about Chapuys and Henry VIII. If you made it to the end of this video and enjoyed it, I sure would appreciate to press that like button. It helps to feed the algorithm and get our content to even more people. And I hope I earned your subscription to my channel where I put out content like this all the time. If you want to keep binging Tudor content, here's a video on Chapuys and Anne Boleyn you might find interesting. Here's one that YouTube thinks you'll like. Thanks so much for watching. Remember, you are deeply loved. I am so glad I share the planet with you. Don't forget to drink your water. I'll be back soon. Bye.